There is no reasonable explanation for this phenomenon. For many years, spacecraft have been studying Jupiter's icy moon. According to all the laws of astrophysics, a vast ocean of warm water lies hidden beneath a thick layer of ice. However, new data from the probes completely shatter this familiar scientific picture. The instruments are showing something completely impossible for a natural celestial object. Europa's ocean should be a chaotic environment with turbulent underwater currents. Instead, the sensors are detecting a frightening, mathematically perfect void. The observed processes contradict the basic laws of thermodynamics and hydrodynamics. This discovery overturns all existing concepts of planetary formation. Scientists had expected to find primitive life there, or at least a chemical broth. Instead of the joy of discovery, the scientific world was confronted with a cold and terrifying unknown. Hidden beneath a layer of ice many kilometers thick lies something beyond human comprehension. Space agencies have been sending research probes to Jupiter for decades. The spacecraft methodically photographed Europa's smooth icy surface in high resolution. The photographs revealed a network of deep cracks against the white backdrop of frozen water. This picture seemed perfectly normal for the cold moon of the gas giant. Astronomers had long since mapped these icy fissures in detail. The movement of the ice was easily explained by the powerful gravitational pull of the massive Jupiter. The planet literally stretched and compressed its moon, creating internal friction.
This friction generated enough heat to keep the water in a liquid state.
Scientists developed flawless mathematical models of this physical process. All calculations indicated the presence of a global ocean tens of kilometers deep. The water was supposed to circulate between the hot rocky core and the cold icy crust. Such an environment was considered an ideal incubator for the emergence of the simplest biological organisms. Space researchers had high hopes for this aquatic environment. Biologists expected to find bacteria there that fed on the chemical energy of thermal springs. Similar ecosystems have long existed at the bottom of Earth's oceans in complete darkness. Europa was considered the prime candidate for the discovery of the first extraterrestrial life form. The anticipation of science's imminent triumph united research centers around the world. Governments willingly allocated colossal budgets for the design of new interplanetary stations.
The planet's brightest minds worked on creating ultra-sensitive radars to penetrate the ice.
The process of understanding the universe proceeded according to a clearly defined and safe plan. This normal and understandable model of reality reassured the human mind. People believed in science's ability to explain any phenomenon in the observable cosmos. The laws of thermodynamics were supposed to work on Europa just as they did on Earth. Nothing foreshadowed the imminent and crushing collapse of these positive expectations. Preparations for the final phase of the satellite's scan were in full swing. New spacecraft had entered Jupiter's orbit for an in-depth exploration of Europa. The instruments were calibrated to detect the slightest signs of biological activity. However, the very first data received left the researchers frozen in utter shock. The very first radar images of the subglacial space turned out to be completely illogical. The signals penetrated the icy shell, but bounced off something utterly incomprehensible. Instead of the chaotic relief of a rocky seabed, the instruments showed a mathematically flat surface. This interface between the two media had not the slightest natural irregularity. The sensors detected a complete absence of natural convection currents in the water.
Warm water from the core should have risen upward, while cold water should have sunk downward.
But Europa's vast water mass turned out to be eerily still and frozen. Billions of tons of liquid were in a state of absolute unnatural calm. Chemical analysis of the geyser emissions also yielded shocking results. The water turned out to be distilled to a degree of purity unimaginable in nature. It was completely devoid of complex organic molecules and mineral impurities. A natural ocean simply cannot be that sterile and empty. The situation was rapidly moving beyond the bounds of normal scientific understanding. The researchers realized they were dealing with something fundamentally different. This place was completely unsuitable for the emergence of any biological life. This environment more closely resembled a giant reservoir of chemically pure reagent. Each new data set shattered yet another established scientific dogma. Scientists tried to find at least one natural explanation for this phenomenon. Theories were put forward about exotic forms of ice and strange magnetic fields. But no hypothesis could logically account for such perfect isolation. There was simply no place for this phenomenon in the modern picture of the universe. Nature always strives for chaos, mixing, and entropy in any system.
Here, however, absolute order was observed, sustained by unknown physical forces.
The cosmos had thrown down a challenge to human intellect for which science was unprepared. A deep dive into the data caused growing anxiety among astrophysicists. The familiar and understandable world of planetary oceans collapsed overnight. It became clear that the icy moon concealed an incredibly complex mystery, and this mystery clearly had an artificial, carefully designed origin. The problem was not limited to temperature and chemical anomalies alone. Radars began to detect strange structural patterns within the icy crust itself. Europa's ice was found to be permeated by a regular geometric network of unknown channels. These formations came together to form an extremely complex, mathematically precise, three-dimensional grid. Natural faults never intersect at perfect right angles. However, the discovered structures formed flawless cubic and hexagonal blocks. It resembled a giant support framework created by unimaginable engineering ingenuity. The moon's icy shell turned out not to be a natural crust, but a highly complex protective shield. Astronomers began to study the magnetic field around this celestial body in detail. It turned out that it pulsated with strict mathematical periodicity. These pulsations were perfectly synchronized with the moon's rotation around Jupiter. Such resonance could not have arisen as a result of random geological processes. Attempts to scan the bottom of this artificial ocean ended in complete failure. Radar signals simply vanished at a certain depth without any reflection. Something at the bottom was effectively absorbing all types of radiation and waves. This device functioned as a perfect black hole for information. Repeated checks of old archival images revealed yet another alarming detail. These geometric structures in the ice were slowly and purposefully changing their shape. The framework was constantly adapting to changes in the gas giant's gravitational field. The system operated in automatic mode, compensating for any external threats. No one knew whether this planetary machine was still carrying out its task. Perhaps it had been abandoned by its creators millions of years ago. Or perhaps this cold intelligence was still observing Jupiter's surroundings. Both possibilities evoked a primal fear in deep space explorers. The realization of the scale of this engineering feat shattered the human psyche.
People had always considered themselves the pinnacle of technological progress in the known world.
Now humanity found itself face to face with its own utter insignificance. This was the first step toward a complete rethinking of the structure of the entire universe. The discovery of Europa's artificial nature forced astronomers to re-examine other moons. Space telescopes were immediately trained on Enceladus, a moon of Saturn. This icy sphere had always been considered the exact geological twin of Jupiter's Europa. The data received from there caused a real panic in scientific centers. Beneath Enceladus's icy crust lay an identical artificial structure. Radars detected the same perfect cubic lattice in the ice. The ocean of Saturn's moon was just as sterile and mathematically immutable. This completely ruled out the possibility of a local malfunction or a unique natural anomaly. This meant that the problem was systemic and all-encompassing. Someone had deliberately encased all the water worlds of the system in a solid ice armor. This phenomenon was no longer an isolated mystery of a single distant moon. It was a large-scale project spanning a significant portion of planetary space. Researchers began extrapolating this data to exoplanets orbiting other stars. If this pattern is observed here, it must be universal everywhere. All water worlds in the universe may be artificially sealed beneath ice. The galaxy suddenly appeared as a collection of sealed-off icy prisons. The scale of this control network was beyond human comprehension. The creators of these shields had the power to shape entire star systems. They methodically sterilized or isolated potentially habitable water worlds. And this process was clearly taking place throughout our vast galaxy. The universe no longer seemed like an endless field for free evolution and development. It had turned into a strictly controlled environment with unknown rules of the game. Someone powerful had erected these icy barriers with a specific cold purpose. And the human mind could not fathom the motives of these ancient engineers. Every new icy moon discovered only confirmed this terrifying rule. Space turned out to be filled with hidden reserves, isolated from the outside world. Hopes for free contact with other civilizations collapsed completely. Reality turned out to be infinitely harsher than any philosophical or scientific theories. The realization of the universality of these barriers led to frightening logical conclusions. If all water worlds are blocked, then water itself poses a threat. Either the creators of the shields were protecting the universe from biological life, or they were protecting biological life itself from something terrible outside. Both hypotheses triggered a profound existential crisis for all of humanity. If the icy shell is a prison, then biology is considered a dangerous virus. A higher intelligence might have deemed spontaneous evolution a threat to the ideal mathematical order. Therefore, all cradles of life were securely preserved in a frozen state. It became clear to humanity why Earth had escaped such an icy lockdown. Our planet is located too close to the hot sun for such a shield. Earth became an accidental anomaly that managed to evade total galactic quarantine. The biological virus was able to break free only on this rocky sphere. If this is the case, then Earth is an open and defenseless target. For centuries, humans have been transmitting radio signals into this dark and dangerous void. Humanity is carelessly attracting the attention of the very forces from which others are hiding. Our civilization looks like a glowing lighthouse in a dark forest full of predators. If the shields around the satellites are shelters, one must not attempt to penetrate them. Any breach of their integrity will draw the attention of cosmic destroyers to our system. But this is precisely what Earthlings plan to do in their ambitious missions. Space agencies wanted to drill through Europa's ice using drills and lasers. These grand scientific plans suddenly became a threat on a global scale. Interfering with the workings of an ancient mechanism could activate automatic destruction systems. A simple research program turned into a potential trigger for the apocalypse. Humanity found itself on the brink of a fatal and irreparable cosmic mistake. The scientific community was paralyzed by fear of taking any active measures. Governments urgently suspended the launch of new probes to the icy moons. For the first time, people realized they were sitting in a glass house in the midst of hostile darkness. And the wisest decision in this situation was to freeze and remain silent. Halting research programs turned out to be much more difficult than scientists had anticipated. Huge corporations had already invested billions in resource extraction on asteroids. Commercial interests were pushing humanity to continue its expansion into deep space. Fear of the unknown clashed with greed and a thirst for new technologies. Meanwhile, automated probes in Jupiter's orbit continued to gather data. They detected faint but distinct energy spikes emanating from Europa's surface. The perfect geometric lattice within the ice began to shift its configuration. This occurred immediately after Earth-based radar scanned the subsurface ocean. Soon, orbital telescopes detected similar changes on Saturn's moons. Enceladus, too, began to alter the structure of its icy protective shell. The network of insulators reacted in unison across the entire vast solar system. This confirmed the hypothesis of a single control center for this terrifying structure. Study of these energy surges revealed their absolute alienness to Earth's physics. Signals were transmitted between satellites at a speed instantly exceeding the speed of light. This completely violated the basic postulates of Einstein's modern theory of relativity. Human science simply lacked the mathematical apparatus to describe this. Observing the awakening moons had turned into the most terrifying task. Scientists monitored the screens around the clock, awaiting aggressive actions from the network. Every change in Jupiter's magnetic field was perceived as a possible prelude to an attack. Humanity had become a terrified spectator of its own inevitable demise. The biggest problem was the total inability to establish normal contact. Earthlings could not send an apology or explain their exclusively peaceful intentions. The inability to explain the nature of the barriers led to the emergence of radical physical theories. Leading thinkers turned to the concept of a virtual simulation of all observable reality. The mathematically perfect structure of Europa's ice served as direct proof of this frightening idea. Natural geology is incapable of generating flawless geometric shapes on a gigantic scale. Under this hypothesis, the cosmos is not a material physical object. It is a colossal program running on unknown and inaccessible computing hardware. The ice shields represent system constraints for optimizing machine memory. The program simply isolates overly complex aquatic worlds to conserve resources. Biological evolution in the oceans generates an infinite amount of chaotic, unpredictable information. Calculating trillions of bacteria and their interactions overloads the core of this supercomputer. Therefore, the simulation simply encapsulates such zones into mathematically smooth ice cubes. Inside them, time stands still, and the computational load drops to zero. Human radars on the probes acted like unauthorized scripts in the system. They attempted to access the locked archives inside the icy shells. The security system immediately reacted to this crude and unforeseen software interference. It began patching vulnerabilities in the protection of its frozen water clusters. This view of reality completely destroyed any meaning of human existence. All great achievements, emotions, wars, and art turned out to be nothing more than lines of code. People desperately tried to understand a world that wasn't even truly real. Existential horror reached unimaginable proportions in scientific and philosophical circles. If Earth is just a program, it can be deleted with a single click. Any careless action by scientists could lead to a system error or crash. The administrators of this simulation could simply roll back the system to a previous save. In that case, the entire history of humanity would vanish without a single physical trace. Space explorers are no longer pioneers of unexplored material worlds. They have turned into hackers trying to study the architecture of their own virtual prison. But humans have no access to the developer console of this gigantic and soulless matrix. They can only passively observe the changes in the variables around them. These thoughts robbed scientists of their last shreds of healthy optimism and faith in progress. Astronomy lost its romance, giving way to a paranoid analysis of reality's glitches. The stars in the sky turned into cold pixels on a massive digital monitor, and no one knew when this cruel program would finish its work. While theorists debated the nature of the matrix, practitioners observed a frightening objective reality. The network of barriers continued its strange and methodical activity throughout the solar system. Sensors detected the formation of a powerful gravitational field around the frozen Jupiterian moon Europa. This field began to slowly focus toward our only habitable planet. The ancient mechanism had clearly completed the process of initial adaptation to Earth's interference. It had moved on to the stage of actively eliminating the identified potential cosmic threat. Gravitational anomalies began to distort the trajectories of small asteroids orbiting the massive Jupiter. The machine used celestial mechanics as an effective and inevitable kinetic weapon. Astronomers calculated the trajectories of these displaced space rocks with terrifying precision. A perfectly calculated swarm of asteroids was heading straight for the inner solar system. This was not a natural disaster or an incredibly rare astronomical coincidence. It was a targeted, mathematically flawless strike against the source of the annoying radio signals. Panic gripped every social stratum of global society without exception.
The alignment
Scientific institutions tried to find a way to send a signal of surrender to this soulless machine. Engineers reconfigured all the world's radio telescopes to transmit the world's mathematical algorithms. But the network maintained absolute informational silence, ignoring any desperate attempts at contact. To the system, humans were no more intelligent than bacteria on a microscope slide. Microbes cannot negotiate with a doctor who wipes down a table with disinfectant. Europe's blocking screen was simply executing its ancient, unchanging defensive algorithm. Contact with biological forms was not provided for in the base software. People's view of the night sky has forever lost its former romantic naivety. The immense Jupiter shone through telescopes not as a beautiful giant, but as an executioner. The ice-covered moons turned out to be no mysterious worlds for future colonies at all. They became silent sentinels, guarding the peace of a dead and cold universe. All space programs were shut down in an attempt to find salvation on Earth. But hiding on the surface of a single planet from the kinetic impact was physically impossible. All that remained for humanity was to watch in horror as the inevitable astronomical finale approached. The price of curiosity in this cruel cosmos turned out to be exorbitant and deadly. Gravitational disturbances from Jupiter grew stronger with each passing month. A swarm of targeted asteroids crossed Mars's orbit, rapidly gaining monstrous speed. Europe's vast icy prison flawlessly fulfilled its part of the defense program. After that, the moon's magnetic pulsations began to slowly and synchronously fade away into space. The ancient machine performed its calculations, adjusted the asteroids' orbits, and simply shut down. It did not need to witness the result of its cold and perfect strike. The mathematics of celestial mechanics guaranteed the complete destruction of the biological threat on Earth's surface. The icy shell once again sank into its million-year slumber, awaiting the next potential error. For the system, this brief flash of activity was merely a minor operational moment. Clearing the local sector of radioactive noise took a negligible fraction of system time. The galactic quarantine continued to function in standard, energy-efficient, and absolutely silent mode. All water worlds remained securely sealed beneath a layer of perfectly geometric ice. Humanity watched the approaching points of light through their powerful telescopes. There was no malice in these stones, only cold and relentless inertia. People understood that they had encountered a pattern they simply could not comprehend. Their civilization had fallen victim to the laws of nature, the existence of which no one had suspected. The latest attempts to comprehend the structure of the universe yielded no definitive answer. People never found out whether this world was a grand virtual matrix. They did not understand exactly what other advanced life forms were hiding from. The truth remained securely hidden beneath a layer of alien, cold ice many kilometers thick. The great silence of space turned out not to be a mystery that needed to be diligently unraveled. It was a strict and cruel rule that absolutely must not be rudely violated. Silence was the only possible form of existence for any species in this space. Those who tried to speak loudly were inevitably erased from the history of this gloomy universe. Our reality had always been infinitely more dangerous than even the boldest science fiction writers had imagined. Space was not a cradle for the future prosperity of a young and ambitious mind. It was a gigantic mechanism for weeding out overly curious and noisy biological systems. And the human species simply failed to pass this most brutal natural and technological selection. The last image transmitted from the orbital telescope was the perfectly smooth surface of Europa. The white icy shield glowed ominously in the cold rays of the distant Earth's sun. Beneath this shell lay the mystery that had killed the most promising civilization in the solar system. And this terrifying mystery will remain unsolved forever in the dead dark waters. The universe is full of endless mysteries, hidden structures, and invisible technological barriers. But some doors in this cosmos are locked not to be opened. They are locked to protect the absolute silence of the vast and dead expanse. And humanity paid the price for daring to knock too loudly on one of them.